Yeah.
Okay, YouTube is starting. Done.
Rabbi, how do I get rid of this? This meeting is being live streamed. How do I get rid of that?
Just press got it or
Got it.
accept. Yeah.
Got it. Ah, there we go. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spotlight my picture, but feel free to change. Do you know how to change the image? You can bring back everybody in front of you if you want to. On the top right.
I just want your big picture in front of me. That's all.
Oh, I'm touched. I'm so touched.
Because now I'm learning together with you.
I'm so touched. But for those who get bored of me, you can change the view option in the right-hand column. It says view, and you can go to gallery view rather than speaker view if you prefer. Okay, so let's get going here. Omar Rabba Bar Rav Huna, Omar Rav Huna. What we're discussing now is more this particular next section is leaving the halachic side of things and going on to the homily. Homily means the drush, the more philosophical perhaps of Torah, and we'll get back to the halachic in a little while in the next paragraph. Amar Rabba Bar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Huna. So he says in the name of Rav Huna. Some people say Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi Elazar. The statement was said in the name of Rav Huna, in the name of Rabbi Elazar. And the statement is as follows: Min HaTorah, according to the Torah, or Min HaNeviim, and according to the prophets, or Min HaKtuvim, and according to the writings. So that's Tanakh, the three different sections of Tanakh: Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Right. So, for example, Tehillim doesn't come from the prophets. Tehillim of David HaMelech, King David, comes from the writings, Ketuvim. Like the Megillas also come from the writings. But from the three sections of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, which is the acronym of Tanakh, we learn the following. B'derech she'adam roitze leilech. This is a fundamental principle in Judaism. B'derech she'adam roitze leilech, in a way that a man wishes to go. Ba molichin oisai. In that particular way, we lead him to go in that way. So again, in a way that a person wants to go, that is the way that we lead him to go. This is, by the way, who leads him? So if you look at footnote 9, footnote 9 says they refers to the angels that are created by man's deeds. So a person does actions, creates angels, which we'll soon see more and more of in the next passage, that our actions actually create angels. Interesting. Positive actions and negative actions create angels, spiritual beings, to either guide us and lead us in the positive way or to lead us in the negative. Right? So what this means is as follows. This is the message of freedom of choice, is that a person is led in the way that he chooses. So we use this in the context of choices that we make. We use this in the context of chinuch and education, right? In other words, ultimately, you've got the choice. Whichever way you choose to go, that's the way the angels are going to escort you. That's the way the angels are going to take you and lead you. And we're going to bring proof for this, as we said, from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Okay, so for the three books of the Torah, we're going to prove this point. And it goes like this. Min HaTorah, according to the Torah, Tichsiv, one second. Tichsiv, as it says, Lo telech imahem. Do not go with them. That's an instruction that was told to Bilam. When Bilam, the prophet, was sent messengers from Balak, the king, to come curse the nation, he consulted God. Remember what he told the messengers? I've got to speak to God and see what they say. So God said, the answer was, Hashem said, Lo telech imahem, you can't go with them. But then, let's continue, but it says further on, Kum lech itam. Get up and go with them. So first God said, you can't go. But then he said, you can go. What do you see from here? That because Bilam persisted a second time, and because God saw that Bilam really wants to go, he let him go. Because whichever way a person chooses to go, that's the way they may go. Obviously, you have to suffer the consequences afterwards. If you make a choice, then the consequences are yours. But ultimately, Bilam made a choice, and therefore Hashem let him go. If you look at footnote 12, he summarizes a story here. He says, when Bilam refused the overtures of the first delegation of princes, Balak, king of Moab, assumed that Bilam had been affronted by the fact that his emissaries had not been from among the highest nobles of the land. Thus he sent a second delegation, rather in number, larger in number and greater in stature. Had Bilam not wished to accompany them, he could have refused simply by reiterating God had told him not to do so. Instead, he told them that he would seek God's reply a second time, to see if he was permitted to go this time. This was an indication that Bilam really did want to accompany them. Moreover, the verse states that God replied, if the men came to summon you, arrive and go with them. Now, God certainly knew that the men had come to summon Bilam. Thus, the reply must be understood as saying, if you think it will be your benefit to go, then you may do so. It's your choice to go. This shows that Bilam actually wished to go, and God allowed him to go for that reason. Because he wanted to go, therefore Hashem said, you may go. It's your choice. Can't stop you. I'm not going to stop you. By the way, I've heard another insight into these two conflicting verses. One verse says that God said, don't go with them. And one verse says, do get up and go with them. And one of the explanations I've heard, I can't remember who exactly is the commentary that brings it down, is that there's a difference between the word imahem and the word itam. If you notice, the wording changes. Initially, he's told, lo telech imahem, don't go with them. And then later, it's changed to kum lech itam, get up and go with them. But the wording changes from imahem to itam. And this is the hint. Obviously, this is not what the Gemara is saying. This is a side answer. What the Gemara, what the side answer says, that the difference between imahem and itam is where imahem means to assimilate among them, to become one with them. Itam means to go along, but not to assimilate. To be with them, but not to assimilate among them. So the first instruction to Bilam was, Lo telech imahem, don't go with them, don't subscribe to their motive of killing and cursing the nation of Israel. That you can't do. Lo telech imahem. But then he saw how much Bilam wanted to go. So then he said, Kum lech itam. If you want to join them, you're more than welcome to join them. But remember, Lo telech imahem, you can't become one with them because you are a messenger of God, you're a prophet of God, and you must remember that which I want and don't want of you to perform. And so that's the difference. And in a way, that's the life that we live today. A Jew living in the big world, on the one hand, joins the nations in the world. We do join well, I start the other way around. On the one hand, we don't join the nations in the world, right? We are not supposed to assimilate. We must remain close and loyal to our values. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we do engage with the world today, more than ever before. That's the calling. You have no choice. You're living in society of a secular world, of a non-Jewish world. You have to engage, but engaging from a distance, itam, not imahem, where we assimilate to become one with them. That's the difference between Bilam and Balak. But that's a side note based on the Mefarshim and the Psukim, on the verses. Here in this particular case, we're explaining that initially God said, don't go. But when he saw how persistent Bilam was, he said, fine, if that's where you want to go, you can go. Ultimately, it's your choice. Okay, then that's the proof that we have from the Torah. Let's now continue with the proof that we have from the Nevi'im. So Min HaNevi'im. we can look at the verses of the prophets and see a similar lesson. The chsiv, as it says, Ani Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. Melamedcha, who teaches you, lahoyil, over the page, to derive benefit. So who teaches you for your benefit. Melamedcha lahoyil. Madrichecha b'derech telech, who leads you in the path that you will go. So you see from here that although God shows man the correct path, because he teaches you for your benefit, but ultimately it's the man that makes the final decision himself to decide which direction he's going to go on. That's the verse from Isaiah, Yeshayahu Navi. And then we come to the last one, Minaksuvim, from the writings, Tichsiv, Im laleitzim hu yalitz, if one goes to the scoffers, you will scoff. In other words, if you hang out with the leitzim, with the clowns, you'll become a clown yourself. V'la novim, and if you go to the humble, yitin chen, then you will evoke grace, favor. Right? So we see from here, says the Gemara, that a person will eventually become absorbed by the environment. Right? And he'll be influenced by it. If you look at footnote 16, he explains that a little bit further, that last point. The Maharsha explains that this principle is not happenstance, but rather it's based on the results of a person's will. Every thought, expression, and action of a person causes an angel to be created in its image. Okay, every person causes an angel to be created in its image. If they are meritorious, good angels are created. If evil, God forbid, destructive angels are created. Should he choose to perform mitzvahs, the good angels created by his will to do mitzvahs will lead him on the way to perform the mitzvahs. Should he choose, God forbid, to commit sins, the destructive angels created by his evil thoughts and urges will lead him further on the path of destruction and sin. So the environment that you choose has the influence around you, and the environment that you choose will support you in your decision. So if you decide to join the scoffers of negativity, that's going to be your encouragement and your involvement. And if you choose to join the scholars and the Torah learners, etc., then that too is going to be the environment that you have. So that goes back to the original point, that we lead a person in the direction that he chooses. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't encourage them to embrace a positive journey. We shouldn't give up and say, well, a person ultimately is responsible for their own actions, and whichever way they decide, well, that's the way they decide. We can't say that because the verse said clearly, the verse from Isaiah, right, in the psukim of the Nevi'im of the prophets, the verse says clearly that God teaches a person how to behave. Ultimately, it's our decision how we choose to behave, but God teaches the person how to behave. So you see that we have the responsibility of actually teaching people the right from wrong, but ultimately they're going to have to make that decision themselves. Okay. So that's a side detail. As I mentioned, the opening paragraph was going to be a little bit different to the context of what we're learning at this point in time. So now we're coming to now 10b2, which is the second page we're on. And now we're going to go back to the more halachic, the more technical side of the Gemara's discussion. And it's regarding the inadvertent killer that killed the man by accident. Rav Huna says, so you have a killer who's running to the city of refuge. That's what he has to do. He's going to run to the city of refuge. And the redeemer of the blood, that means the avenger, the one who's avenging the blood of the dead, found him. He found him on his way to the city of refuge. So he chased him. And he killed him. Now the question is that considered murder? Right? On the one hand, Torah says that you being the family member of the deceased, you have the right to kill the killer if you catch him. On the one hand. On the other hand, he's running to the city of refuge. So are you allowed to catch him before he gets there? That's going to be the question. So we say, Potter, he is exempt. There's no punishment for that. It's an interesting terminology, Potter. What does Potter mean? Potter means if you did something wrong, you're exempt from punishment or from guilt. What does it imply? The way I understand it is he's not supposed to do it. Okay. Interesting terminology. Potter. Potter implies you're not supposed to, but if you did it, you'd be exempt. All right, let's continue. Kesavar, this particular statement of Rav Huna is because Rav Huna holds the following logic, or not even logic, the following interpretation. Rav Huna says, it says in the verse, V'loi ein mishpat maves. To him, there is no death penalty. That's what the verse says. And to him, there's no death penalty. Who's the him? What do you mean for him there's no death penalty? Who's the him? So Rav Huna says, B'goyel hadam hu dichsiv. The him is the redeemer of the blood. It's the one avenging the blood. He has no death penalty. Why? Because he's allowed to kill. If he wants to kill, he's allowed to kill. Even before he gets to the city of refuge, he's allowed to kill. As it says in the Art Scroll Rights, and it teaches that if he kills the killer, even before he had a chance to reach a city of refuge, he is absolved from any punishment for killing him. Sorry, yeah?
If what happens if the Gol Adam is gone to take his revenge, but the killer, in defending himself, kills the Gol Adam instead?
Yeah. Okay. So in self-defense, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, in self-defense.
Rabbi, isn't this taking the law into your own hands?
You mean when he fights back?
Yes.
No, to chase him and kill him.
No. Well, so okay. There's 2 points here. The Torah is actually saying that you got permission to go kill him. So that's a decree from God. God decided you can go kill him. Okay, so that's in the hands of Hashem. Hashem said, and I don't think there's logic to it, by the way. It's one of those things that's called Gezeras HaKosov, the decree of the verse, the decree of God, that God let the Redeemer kill the killer.
But does it say that? It says that if he kills him, he's not punished. Doesn't give him permission to go and do it.
So I want to get
to do it.
Yeah, one second. Let me just pull out a chumash that will help clarify something here. 1 second. So this pasuk is, and Mike, we'll come back to your question in a moment.
Okay.
Give me a second here. Mois Chaf Aleph. Yeah, and let's read this verse here. No, not this one. One second. 18. Yeah, Deuteronomy. Okay, 1 second. Deuteronomy. It's Devarim 19:6. Okay. Right, here we are. I instructed you to signpost these cities clearly and place them at equal distance, in case an avenger of the blood pursues the killer while his heart is hot and he manages to catch up with him because of the long road, and he strikes him to death. For being that the murderer had not hated the victim yesterday. Oh, okay, hold on. This translation is a little bit off.
There's a translation in footnote 18. Maybe we should look there.
Yes, okay. So this is the verse I was looking for. Thank you. Lest the redeemer of the blood chase after the murderer, for his heart will become enraged, and he will overtake him, for the distance will be great, and he will strike him dead. But there is no death penalty upon him, for he did not hate him yesterday and before yesterday. It's a very strange verse, guys. Let me unpack this, because we're going to, thanks Hilton for pointing it out, because this verse is going to come up now in the Gemara's discussion. For the distance, he will strike him dead, and there'll be no death penalty upon him. We're assuming now that who's upon him? Upon him is the Redeemer, the Avenger. The next phrase is strange, for he did not hate him yesterday and before yesterday. How does that fit in here? So we'll come back to that point in a second. But the way Rav Huna understands this is that he'll not have the death penalty. Back to Lewis's point, it sounds like he shouldn't do it. But if he does do it, he can. Right? The word patur means he's exempt. Or the phrase, and he won't be guilty. There'll be no death penalty upon him. Sounds like if he decides to do it, he can do it. Maybe not ideal. I don't know. Does it say, maybe implies it's not ideal? Anyway, I'm not sure about that point, Lewis. Coming back to Mike's point was, what happens if the killer, the original killer, fights back against the Avenger, against the Redeemer, and kills a second time round out of self-defense? Because the guy's coming towards him to kill him, and when someone comes towards you to kill you, you have the permission to fight back. It's called rodef. You can fight back and chase back and protect yourself. And what happens if he kills as a result? Well, Mike, the answer is he's rushing to the city of refuge anyway. So now he'll go to the city of refuge for killing two people. It's not intentional murder, I think. It's not intentional murder because he's defending himself. He's protecting himself from the redeemer of the family.
But the court in any case didn't find him guilty of murder.
For the first one, you mean? For the first case, right? Hey, the court didn't find him guilty for the first case, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, correct.
Yeah, that's why he's going to...
Very much.
Exactly. He still has to go to the courts at the city of refuge, and he's still going to be judged. Correct. I see your point.
On the second one, a rodef doesn't have to go to the miklat.
He's an expert on
Yeah. No, you're right. So he's going for the first one. No, he's going for the first case. You're right. He's going for the first case. Leon, to your point, that's because he hasn't been judged yet. That's the question. Can the avengers of the family attack him before he's been judged?
I will do my best to live up to it.
Right? That's the question.
Because but how can you go to the city of refuge without being judged first?
No. He goes to the city of refuge first, immediately. The Gemara will elaborate on this point. But the order of events is he goes to the city of refuge first, and there at the city of refuge, he's judged. And there they'll decide whether he's considered negligent or he's considered intentional or unintentional, or was he guilty or was he not guilty. All that happens while he's in the city of refuge. Okay. So that's what we're saying over here. Can the avengers of the blood of the family attack him before he even goes through that process? And the way Rav Huna understands it is they can. Well, I don't know if, they can, Should they? I'm not sure if they should. If they do, they don't get prosecuted. and punished. Okay. Now, that's how Rav Huna understands it. That the avenger who kills on the way to the city of refuge will not be punished, and there won't be a death penalty at all. Meisvei, so now the Gemara asks a question based on a text of a brisa. It says, "V'loi ein mishpat mavis." That's the verse we just quoted. That he does not have the death penalty upon him. And we understood who's it talking about. He's talking about we said the redeemer of the blood, the family member, right? Look what it says now. In this brisa, it says something different. In this brisa, it says, "Beretzeach hakosav medaber." It's actually talking about the murderer, the killer himself. The killer himself, the Torah is talking about. Then what's the Torah saying about the killer? How do you interpret this verse? And the killer will not have the death penalty upon him. Leon, why not? Why doesn't the killer have the death penalty on him? You just said the answer.
Well, he hasn't been judged yet.
Very good.
Been to court yet.
Exactly, he hasn't been to court. So because he hasn't been to court, therefore you can't say he's a killer. So that's how the Brisa understands it differently to the way we learned it originally. Now we're saying it's talking about the murderer, the killer, the accidental killer. Because the accidental killer hasn't been in court yet, therefore you can't punish him. He can't have the death penalty. So that's different to the way we learned it originally. If you look three lines back, Rav Huna says it's talking about the family member. And the family member can kill him. And he won't be held guilty for that. And comes along the Brisa and says, no, it's not saying that at all. It's saying that the killer is not yet punishable by the death penalty. That's what it's saying. So now the question is asked, well, I don't know how to learn anymore, the Gemara says. Are you saying that we're talking about the killer himself? That the killer doesn't have the death penalty? Or maybe we're talking about the redeemer of the family, like we learned originally in the names of Rav Huna. Maybe it's talking about the redeemer, that the redeemer can kill and won't be held guilty. How do you know it's talking about the murderer, the killer? Maybe it's talking about the redeemer. So this is what I told you when we read the verse in English. I said, hold on for a moment because it's going to come up. This is what it says. If you look in the Hebrew on the right-hand column on top, it says, look what it says. And he doesn't hate him from yesterday or the day before yesterday. What does that mean? So if you look in the verse and you find these words that we just read now, you'll see a context. And the context, you'll see a context. And the context will indicate the meaning of the verse. Let's hold your place there on the top right-hand column and go back down to the footnote 18, which you just read in English. And let's see where these words are. That he never hated him for yesterday or the day before yesterday. So look at that verse there, and I'll go straight to the hyphen. The hyphen says, but there is no death penalty upon him, for he did not hate him yesterday and before yesterday. Again, but there is no death penalty upon him. Him. Who's the him? We're debating the him. There's no death penalty upon him. Who's the him? And then it continues, for he did not hate him yesterday and before yesterday. He didn't hate him. Who's it talking about? When it says he didn't hate him, what's it talking about? Okay, so let me explain the context here. He didn't hate him is talking about the killer didn't hate the deceased. The original killer never ganged up against his victim. The original killer didn't, did you see the headline? Terrible headline in Israel, I think last week, that a frum businessman was shot outside a shul. I think in Rehovot. Did you see that? Did you see that headline? That a shooter. It's actually interesting how these things don't just happen in South Africa. But a shooter met a businessman outside a shul, and as the businessman walked out the shul, a gunman shot him dead, point blank. The story is now unraveling where he owed a lot of money, so they just decided to take him out. But anyway, it's a sad story. The point is, in this story that we're discussing now, there's no hate. He never ganged up against anyone. It was an accident. Remember the scenario that we described last time, where he climbed the ladder and then he fell off the ladder. He landed on someone and killed that person. There was no hate there. That's what the verse is saying. For he did not hate him yesterday and before yesterday. So who's the context? Who's the theme? Who are we talking about? Simply speaking, it's talking about the killer. The killer never hated the victim. And because the killer never hated the victim, therefore the killer is not deserving of the death penalty. That's what the verse seems to be saying. The verse is saying that the killer doesn't deserve the death penalty. And Leon, you added in a good point, is that he still needs to come to court. And if the court says that he never intended this intentionally, well, then he's not deserving of the death penalty. So what we just realized is like this. Sorry, the printer's just going over here and causing a bit of noise. We'll just give it a second to go. Finish. Okay, it may go for a while. I'll just try to ignore that printer for a few moments. Okay, so what we just did now is, if you look in the text of the verse, it seems like, if you look at the text, it seems like the context of this verse is actually talking about the killer. And the killer is not deserving of the death penalty. Why? Because he was accidental. Not like Rav Huna. Rav Huna did not say that. Rav Huna said that the avenger, the redeemer of the family, who decides to kill, right? It's called the Goel Hadam. The Goel Hadam is exempt. That's how Rav Huna understands it. That the Goel Hadam, the redeemer of the family, is exempt. The problem is with Rav Huna is, how do you read how do you understand the text? If you go back to footnote 18 and just read that text inside, but there is no death penalty upon him. Who's him? According to Rav Huna, the redeemer, the family member. Why? For he did not hate him yesterday and before yesterday. That's out of context. What does that mean? He did not hate him yesterday or before yesterday. You're a family member. What's it got to do with hating him yesterday or not yesterday? So Rav Huna's explanation is a little bit wobbly because it doesn't really fit into the theme of the verse. The verse seems to be clearly talking about the killer, right? Not necessarily the avenger, the redeemer of the family. All right, let's put that aside. So our question now is against Rav Huna. Question now is against Rav Huna. So let's go to the right-hand column of the page, 10b2. Right-hand column. And the answer is that although this brisa that we just read contradicts Rav Huna, nonetheless, Rav Huna has another brisa to support himself. Let's just explain to revise this point. A brisa is like a mishnah. A brisa is like a precedent. It's an earliest text that's very powerful. So is a mishnah. So if we have a brisa that contradicts Rav Huna is a later sage. He's a sage of the Talmud. And therefore, he cannot stand up against the brisa and contradict the brisa. He also can't stand up and contradict the mishnah because he's only a Talmudic sage that came later. Okay? But there's only a single case where he can argue against the brisa, a single case where he can argue against the mishnah, And that is, if there's another text to support him, if he can find another text of another brisa or another Mishnah to support his opinion, then he can argue against the Mishnah or brisa. And that's our goal now. What the Gemara is saying is, in the next paragraph, Hu de Amar ki hai Tana. Rav Huna actually holds like the upcoming Tana, who taught another brisa. And the second brisa does support Rav Huna's statement. The Tanya, as it says in the following brisa, V'loi ein mishpat mavis, and he will not have the death penalty against him. Who's it talking about? So the way Rav Huna understands it, and so does this statement, B'goyal hadam hakosam medaber. This verse is discussing, again, the Redeemer. Because that's Rav Huna's opinion. It's talking about the Redeemer, the family member. And here too, we challenge him. Are you telling me that the verse is talking about the avenger, the family member? Or maybe it's discussing the murderer or the killer. Maybe it's discussing the killer. Who said it's discussing the family member, the Redeemer? And here the Brisa answers. Because when it says, because he did not have hate against him, or the day before, or for yesterday, or the day before yesterday. Hare roteach amor. That means that those words, and this is getting a little bit technical, so just hold on here, because the next piece is a lot easier. But the verse is talking about the killer, because the killer did not know him yesterday or the day before yesterday. Okay? So it's already been said. Obviously, the killer doesn't deserve death yet, because the killer didn't intend to do it. So it's obvious. The verse, by saying the words that he did not know him the day before yesterday or the day before yesterday, you're already implying that he does not deserve the death penalty. The killer, that is. Then why say the words clearly? Why must you spell it out? Hamani mekayim v'loy ein mishpat maves. Why must you say clearly that he doesn't have the death penalty? It's clear already that because he never intended to kill him yesterday or the day before, it's clear already that he won't have the death penalty. Why must the Torah spell it out clearly again and say that to him there'll be no death penalty? Why must he say it two times? And the answer is because we're talking about two different cases. So that's what the Brisa here is saying. B'goyal hadam hakosam medaber. Because the verse is actually talking about the family member, and that's why the Torah says the two phrases. So according to this Brisa, and according to Rav Huna, the pasuk, the verse is actually saying two things. Number one is the killer who's running away. He's not a murderer. Therefore, you can't, and therefore, he should not be put to death by the Beth Din. He must run to the city of refuge because he's not a murderer. How do you know he's not a murderer? Because he never intended to kill his friend. It just happened by accident. So therefore, he doesn't get the death penalty. Point number one. Point number two is that when the family member, the revenger of his blood, chases him to kill him, there too, he's allowed to do it and he won't be prosecuted because he has the ability to do so. And so we actually have the context of both. On the one hand, it's the killer. On the other hand, it's the family member who's killing him. Okay, the next piece on 10b3 says the Gemara quotes a Mishnah, and the goal of this Mishnah is actually to contradict Rav Huna again. So we'll come back to that. But let's first learn the Mishnah. And it says in the Mishnah, we give the killer two sages to walk along with him. Interesting, not soldiers, right, with guns or weapons or knives, but Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars. What can they do? How strong are the Torah scholars to walk next to him? Okay, so we give him two Torah scholars. Why? Shemo ya'agelo baderech. Because he may want, listen to this, he may want to kill the family, he may want to kill the killer to avenge the blood of his family. And therefore we need the two witnesses there. V'yidabru elav, and they should tell him when he's trying to prepare himself for murder. He wants to kill the killer. Well, then the witnesses must stop him and they must talk to him. V'yidabru elav, they must speak to him. Full stop. What do they tell him in those words? What do they tell him? It just says Ve'idabru elav, and I'll speak to him. Okay, so the Gemara starts to assume. My love is not the following. The Master Obey, they're actually warning him. Could it be that the job of these scholars is to warn him? The Master Obey, they're warning him. The Ikotil, that if he kills Bar Katalahu, he'll be liable to death. That's the job of the two Torah scholars, to warn him that if he goes ahead to avenge the blood of his family member, Bar Katalahu, he'll be liable to death. Look at footnote 25. Okay, so look at this. The Gemara assumes at this point that the Torah scholars dissuade the Goel Hadam, the family members, by teaching him that he is forbidden to revenge himself upon the killer at this time, and formally warning him that he will be liable to the death penalty if he does so. Chazon Ish states that these Torah scholars will be sent to accompany him after the verdict of exile, not during his initial flight to the Ir Miklat after the killing. Okay, we'll speak about that in a second. But that's the job, to warn him, you can't kill them. So what do you see from this brisa? This brisa, once again, contradicts Rav Huna. Because Rav Huna said in the previous page, what did Rav Huna say? Rav Huna said that if the family members want to kill him before he gets to the city of refuge, they may do so. That's what Rav Huna says. But here the brisa says clearly, you appoint two Torah scholars, and the role of the Torah scholars is to actually warn the Redeemer not to do it. She's not allowed to do it. So is he allowed to or is he not allowed to? That's the question. We seem to be contradicting Rav Huna's statement. So it says the Gemara, Loi. It's not what it means. Doesn't mean that they convinced the Redeemer out of it. That's not what it means, and they spoke it over. Remember those words? Ve'idabru elav, and they spoke it over. Doesn't mean to warn them in that process. Kedetanya, but rather what does it mean? It means as follows. Kedetanya, ve'idabru elav divrei haru'uyim. And they would say to him suited things. They said to him, Atinag boy minag shofchei damim. Do not behave towards him as is customary with a murderer. Bishkaga b'ma'aseh liyadei. The deed came into his hand inadvertently. You can't blame him. So what's changing now? What's the answer? If you notice the tone, it's no longer a warning. He's no longer stopping him and saying, you're not allowed to do this, and I'm warning you that you'll be punishable if you go ahead and do it. That's not what the answer right now is. But rather what we're saying here is, it's their job, it's the Torah scholar's job, to discourage the process of killing and being a revenge of the family. That we can do. We can discourage for sure. That's the job of the Torah scholars, is to discourage the family member from avenging the blood. Okay? But the way we're clarifying it is it's not a warning. They're not warning. They're just advising. But Meir says, Humedaber ayidei atzmoi. The Meir says that the killer actually is speaking about himself. Shneimah, as it says, V'zeh dvar haretzeach, this is the word of the killer. Okay, hold on. Amullah said to him, I'll clarify this paragraph in a second. Amullah said to him, Harbe shlichus oisa. More would be accomplished by the pleading of an emissary than by the pleading of the killer himself. In other words, who's going to stop the family member from coming? Is it going to be the killer himself calling out, or is it going to be the two scholars that were there who are going to call out? The Gemara is saying it's a lot easier for an emissary to speak on my behalf. For me to shout out by myself, I can try. But for somebody else to represent me, it's a lot better. It's a lot more ideal. Okay. At any rate, you see in the article, at any rate, we see from this brayso that the speaking of the people accompanying the killer is in the nature of a plea rather than a formal warning. It's not actually a warning. But rather it's a suggestion or a plea. Okay, slightly different. Okay, that brings to the end of that discussion. In other words, like this, we had a question in the earlier paragraph. We had a question which showed that you're not allowed to kill. How do you know you're not allowed to kill? Because the Torah scholars would warn you not to kill. Okay, that shows us that you're not allowed to kill. What's the answer in the second half? The answer in the second half is he can kill, but it's their job to tell him that he's transgressing. That's the difference. It's his job to tell him, right? So in other words, I'm not warning him per se. I'm not threatening him that he's not allowed to do it. What I am saying is, hold back. Right? No need. Hold back. And that does meet the opinion of Rav Huna, who says that the Redeemer can go. He may be given a guilt trip. You shouldn't be going. And why are you rushing? And why are you taking things so slowly? Right? Sorry. So that's the point there. You can warn him not to. You can warn him not to. But you don't threaten him that he can't. That's the opinion of Rav Huna. All right, let's do another. Okay, let's do this quite quickly because you'll see this next piece moves quite quickly. Omar, we said earlier, that the deed happened inadvertently. It wasn't a mistake. Says the Gemara Pshita, we know it was a mistake. Div amazed if it was intentional. Bar Golosor, why is he going to exile? So we know that he did it b'shgaga. We know he did it accidentally because he's going to exile because that's why he did. That's why he's going to exile. Why must we emphasize that? So top of the next column, you're right. An intentional murderer goes to exile. Sorry, you're right. There's a time when an intentional murderer goes to exile. But Tanya, as it says in the Brisa, Rabbi Yossi would say, but initially, when the murder happened, whether it was inadvertent or was intentional, they would quickly run to the city of refuge. Everyone would. The moment they killed someone, they would run to the city of refuge. Or based in Shochin and Levinos and Misham, and the court will go and send for him and collect him and bring him to court. Whoever is liable for death, haraguhu, they executed him. Shneim, as it says, and the elders sent and they took Misham him, and they put him in the hands of the Redeemer, and he shall die. Who kills him? It sounds like the Redeemer killed him. Okay, let's go on. Interesting. It sounds like the Beis Din would hand him over to the family members, the redeemers of the blood, and they would kill him. Interesting. Okay. Now, Mishalon is chayev, but if he was found to be lenient, petaruhu, they would exempt him, exonerate him. As it says, and the community would, or the tribunal, the court, would rescue the killer from the hands of the Redeemer. Okay? If he's found guilty to be in exile, that means it was accidental. You would return him to his place. As it says, and the tribunal would return him to his city of refuge, where he had fled. So you see that the point is, back to our original point, everyone runs to the city of refuge. And then it's clarified as to whether he's intentional and he deserves a death penalty, or whether he's accidental and he stays in exile. As it says, Rabbi Meir says, it doesn't work that way. Me'atzmam hen goylin. What happens is that they run there on their own. We don't put him there. He goes there on his own. Because they think, the average person actually thinks that a city of refuge absorbs inadvertent and advertent killers. And they don't know that the city of refuge absorbs inadvertent killers. But they don't absorb intentional killers. Right? The city of refuge is only made for the unintentional. So according to Rebbe, it's not us forcing them to go. It's they go on their own because they think that they're all seeking safe haven. Both the intentional and unintentional are going to seek safe haven. And we then need to clarify to them that anybody that's done this intentionally, right, but mazed, cannot stay here. Because this place is specifically for inadvertent killers. If you killed accidentally, you can no longer stay here. And that's how the Brisa ends. And that's when the Brisa states that the scholars tell the Redeemer of the blood that the killer killed unintentionally. They're informing him that the killer was not an intentional killer who was fleeing to the city of refuge, but an unintentional killer. So that's the clarification. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up that point there, that last point that we just read now, and that is, I think Leon raised it initially. It sounds like everyone goes towards the city of refuge naturally. So it sounds like, whether it's intentional or unintentional, everybody who wants to can arrive to the city of refuge, and then the court case process will begin, and in the courts they'll decide who are the intentional and who are the unintentional. And that's how we end this particular part of the Gemara. Okay.